In the year 1823, in a small riverside town, something happened that people would whisper about for generations, a sound that echoed through the misty valleys, haunting the nights when the wind carried secrets no one dared speak aloud. It began one autumn evening, when the sun had long sunk behind the forested hills, leaving a cold silver haze over the village, and a strange tolling drifted from the old church bell. Though no hand touched the rope, villagers awoke startled, peering from shuttered windows, the distant sound rolling across cobblestone streets and misty fields, unsettling their hearts, as if the bell itself carried warnings that stirred both curiosity and fear in equal measure. No one could explain it, and yet it happened every midnight, a bell ringing alone, its hollow chime cutting through the darkness, whispering of secrets buried beneath the floorboards of the church and of sins long forgotten. The village lay along a winding river, its banks lined with maple and oak, leaves painted in gold and crimson, the air crisp with autumn, and smoke rising from chimneys mingled with the faint scent of damp earth and wood. At the center stood the old stone church, its bell tower weathered by decades of wind and rain, wooden beams creaking under the weight of history, a place both revered and quietly feared by villagers who crossed its shadow. Reverend Whitaker, a man of quiet dignity, strode along the cobblestones each morning, his black coat brushing the fallen leaves, eyes sharp yet haunted, carrying a faith tempered by years of sorrow and lingering doubts about human nature. His wife, Mary Whitaker, tended the church garden, her hands worn and nimble, planting chrysanthemums and marigolds that caught the sun in warm bursts of color, her gentle smile hiding a mind attentive to every whispered rumor among villagers. Among the townsfolk, whispers carried fastest about Samuel Crane, a young blacksmith, strong and clever, with calloused hands and a restless heart, his curiosity often tipping into recklessness, drawn to the mysteries the village preferred to leave alone. Children played in the narrow streets, their laughter echoing like fragile bells. Yet each night they paused at the sound of the old church bell, eyes wide with unease, convinced the tower hid secrets no one dared confront openly. Autumn winds rustled through the trees, stirring the river's surface, carrying distant cries of geese overhead, while the bell tower cast a long shadow across the village square, hinting at the silent presence of history and the unseen weight of conscience. Reverend Whitaker often walked alone to the riverbank at dusk, staring at reflections that rippled like time itself, pondering sins both confessed and hidden, his mind returning, always, to the bell and the mysteries it seemed to guard in silence. Samuel lingered near the church at twilight, hammer in hand, pretending work kept him busy, yet drawn each night to the tower, eyes tracking the shadows that clung to its weathered stones, wondering if courage could pierce the unknown. The villagers kept their routines, tending livestock and repairing fences, yet beneath the daily rhythms lay a shared unease, a subtle tension that grew each night the bell rang, and even the bravest felt fingers of apprehension tracing their spines. Children whispered to each other about the bell's strange timing, convinced it was tied to some secret pact, and mothers shushed them, warning that curiosity could invite trouble, for the church had long been a place where stories of judgment lingered. Reverend Whitaker and Samuel met occasionally at the forge, discussing matters in hushed tones, exchanging wary glances, each aware that the bell's tolling hinted at something larger than either faith or skill, a moral reckoning yet to unfold. Samuel lingered beneath the bell tower one night, shadows stretching across the stones, wondering why it rang alone, his fingers tracing the ropes, heart pounding as though the sound whispered secrets meant only for him. Reverend Whitaker sat in the vestry, candlelight flickering on wooden walls, pondering whether the bell's strange tolling was a warning, a test of faith, or a message of something far older than the village itself. Samuel spoke quietly to Mary, his curiosity barely restrained. "Do you think the bell could ring on its own?" She shook her head, eyes downcast. But even her calm voice trembled with unspoken fear. Villagers began noticing subtle signs. Footprints near the tower at dawn, doors slightly ajar, yet no one admitted to being awake, leaving an invisible tension that threaded through conversations and markets alike. Samuel's restlessness grew. He polished metal late into the night, hammer ringing, but his mind wandered to the bell, to the hollow echo that seemed to call him personally, urging him to climb higher. Reverend Whitaker felt his sermons falter, words trembling over moral lessons he could no longer deliver with certainty. The bells tolling haunting his conscience, a reminder that unseen forces sometimes guided human choices. One evening, Samuel whispered to himself while inspecting the ropes, "If it rings alone, something is wrong, something I must see." Yet a shadow of dread clutched his chest, warning that curiosity carries a price. Mary noticed Samuel's obsession, her hands trembling as she placed a lantern on the doorstep, warning, "Some mysteries, Samuel, are not meant for us to touch." But he only nodded, eyes fixed on the dark tower. The wind shifted one night, rattling shutters and sending leaves tumbling across the cobblestones, carrying a sound, half the bell, half the howl of the river, that made Samuel jump, as if nature itself conspired with the mystery. Reverend Whitaker walked the empty streets after midnight, lantern in hand, following the echo of the bell, hearing the faint creak of the tower boards, wondering if the church held a warning he was not prepared to face. Samuel began leaving his forge early, wandering through fog-laden streets, studying the tower from every angle, imagining what force could move the bell without human hands. The thrill and terror mingling in his chest. Villagers murmured among themselves about shadows seen on the tower walls, or lights flickering within, speculating whether Samuel's curiosity had awakened something better left asleep. The line between imagination and reality blurring in the autumn chill. Mary prayed beside the hearth, whispering for guidance, sensing the pull that gripped Samuel, knowing his ambition could lead to harm, and fearing that faith alone might not shield him from what the bell concealed. Reverend Whitaker found himself drawn toward the tower each night, following the tolling, though fear rooted him to the shadows, as if invisible eyes tested his courage and judged his intentions silently and without mercy. Samuel approached the tower one windy night, glancing back at the sleeping village, hearing the bell toll once more, louder and emptier than before, his heart racing, questioning whether he sought truth or merely invited danger. Villagers began reporting unease at dawn, animals restless, doors slamming with no wind, whispers of judgment from above. The town steeped in a tension that threaded through every hearth and alley, the bell tolling a silent authority. A gust of wind swept through the square as Samuel climbed the tower stairs, each step creaking, echoing, the bell seemingly alive, and a thought struck him. Some acts awaken forces that watch, remember, and demand consequence. Reverend Whitaker wrestled with confession and curiosity, wondering if faith required action or patience, the bell tolling as both a question and a challenge, shaking the foundation of his convictions with each midnight chime. Mary's voice carried over the river one foggy evening, calling for Samuel to return, yet the sound of the bell drew him upward, nearer to revelation, or to ruin. The moral tension tightening like a noose around conscience. Samuel reached the top of the bell tower, hands trembling on the ropes, breath catching in the chill, staring at the massive bell suspended above him, as if it waited with quiet intent for his next move. A sudden gust rattled the tower boards, making the bell sway, its deep tone resonating through the village, and Samuel stepped back, realizing he might be a pawn in something older, stronger than any human will. Reverend Whitaker, sensing unrest, climbed the narrow stairs behind Samuel, lantern light flickering across stone walls, voice barely a whisper. "Be careful, Samuel, some stones are laid for judgment." not discovery. But Samuel pressed onward. The bell swung once, then stopped, silent, as if testing their resolve. And for a heartbeat the world held its breath, the village below unaware. The river reflecting the stars in muted fear down below. Villagers murmured, windows lit with candlelight, dogs growling, sensing tension that had no visible source. And a few braver souls whispered of curses or restless spirits haunting the old church tower. Samuel's fingers brushed the rope, and the bell began to toll on its own, deep and hollow, shaking the wooden beams, echoing across rooftops and fields, a sound that seemed alive, carrying judgment and warning alike. Reverend Whitaker gripped the rope beside Samuel, heart hammering, eyes wide, recalling sermons on pride and temptation, realizing that curiosity and faith both walked a fragile line in the presence of the supernatural. Suddenly, a crack ran along the tower's stone wall, dust falling like snow, and the bell tolled again, louder, as if the building itself breathed with anger, testing whether human hands could contain forces beyond comprehension. Samuel turned to leave, but the rope refused to release, as though the bell demanded acknowledgement, a silent trial unfolding in the flickering lantern light, leaving him frozen in equal parts fear and awe. Mary arrived at the base of the tower, lantern shaking in her hands, calling his name, her voice carrying over the wind, but the bell drowned all other sound, and her heart sank with helpless dread. Villagers gathered in the square, drawn by the tolling, their faces pale and eyes wide, realizing the bell's toll was no mere wind or prank, but a sign that their choices, greed, and gossip had stirred something ancient. Samuel finally loosened his grip, the bell slowing, but its echoes lingered, vibrating in the bones of the tower, in the streets, in the hearts of every listener, leaving questions heavier than fear itself. Reverend Whitaker descended slowly, urging Samuel to follow, each step creaking under the weight of anxiety, the moral lesson pressing like a shadow over their shoulders, teaching restraint where curiosity had once prevailed. Some villagers reported strange dreams that night, visions of the bell swinging without hands, of shadows climbing the tower, of voices murmuring caution and consequence, and whispered prayers filled hearts across the sleeping town. Samuel felt the first tremor of remorse, realizing the thrill of discovery had drawn him close to danger not meant for human touch, his mind heavy with both pride and guilt. Mary tended candles in the windows, watching the river's mist curl over the banks, praying the bell would not toll again. Yet knowing the village had been marked, its conscience stirred awake by midnight judgment. Reverend Whitaker convened the town elders, discussing what had happened, debating whether faith or action could undo what had been stirred, and the bell, silent now, seemed to listen, waiting for the right moment to speak again. Samuel avoided the tower for days, yet dreams of the tolling bell haunted him, echoing over cobblestones, across the river, teaching that some forces are indifferent to courage, only observing the heart that dares challenge them. A lone dog howled at midnight, the echo merging with memories of the bell, and villagers felt the lesson seep into their bones, the consequences of curiosity and pride lingering like autumn mist, never fully dissipating. Mary, sitting beside the hearth, reflected that caution was a moral as old as the village itself, and sometimes, witnessing the results of missteps taught more than sermons ever could. The bell a silent witness to human flaws. Reverend Whitaker, walking past the river, felt the weight of the unseen watching, knowing that sometimes the choices of one man ripple through generations. The bell's voice a reminder that conscience is tested in silence. The bell tolled sharply at midnight, louder than ever before, shaking windows, rattling shutters, and drawing every villager to the square, hearts racing, as if the night itself held its breath, waiting for judgment to descend. Samuel stood at the tower entrance, eyes wide, hands frozen, realizing the bell's ringing was no accident, no trick of wind, but a force awakened by curiosity and human pride alike. Reverend Whitaker reached Samuel's side, lantern trembling, whispering, "Do not let fear guide you, nor pride tempt you, for what lies above watches every heart, and the bell knows truth without mercy." A sudden gust rattled the ropes violently, the bell swinging of its own accord, tolling a hollow rhythm that reverberated across the village, drowning every other sound, echoing like a pulse of unseen power. Mary's voice carried across the square, calling Samuel to step back, but the bell's toll seemed to respond to him, faster, louder, and each chime vibrated in his chest, as if demanding acknowledgement. The tower groaned under unseen weight, stones cracking along seams, dust falling like ash, and Samuel felt the first real pangs of fear, understanding that the bell demanded more than observation. It demanded reckoning. Villagers covered their ears, some kneeling, others frozen in awe, the sound filling every alley and field, a living presence that revealed the consequences of human interference with forces beyond comprehension. Samuel clutched the ropes again, but they resisted, as if the bell rejected his control, swinging freely, chimes reverberating with a tone that spoke of judgment, warning, and inevitable consequence. Reverend Whitaker grasped Samuel's arm, urging him downward, but the stairway seemed endless, shadows lengthening and twisting, as if the tower itself conspired to keep them close to the bell's power. A blinding wind swept through the square, lifting leaves and lantern smoke, and the bell tolled once, then twice, then thrice, each note slower, heavier, echoing sorrow and anger that no human could contain. Mary, tears in her eyes, called for Samuel to remember the lesson, but the boy's pride had led him too far, and the bell's toll seemed to mock the audacity of mortal curiosity. The villagers gasped as the tower swayed, dust cascading like snow, and Samuel realized the bell had awakened something that required acknowledgement, and only humility could halt its wrath, forcing him to confront fear head-on. Reverend Whitaker, voice steady despite the chaos, urged prayer and reflection, teaching Samuel and the villagers alike that moral reckoning is not punishment, but the mirror of choices left unchecked. The bell's final toll rang through the valley, deep and resonant, shaking both stone and conscience, leaving an echo that seemed to imprint itself on every heart, a lesson in restraint, respect, and unseen consequence. As dawn approached, the bell stilled, the tower silent, the village trembling in awe and relief, each soul aware that the night had revealed truths that words could never fully capture. Samuel descended the tower, pale and shaken, his pride tempered by fear, and Reverend Whitaker followed, both knowing the bell had delivered judgment not of vengeance, but of understanding, leaving a heavy, solemn silence. The sun rose over the village, soft light filtering through autumn mist, illuminating streets scattered with leaves, and the bell tower stood silent, a reminder of the night when curiosity and pride had met a force beyond human understanding. Samuel walked slowly through the square, eyes downcast, feeling the weight of what had passed, the villagers' quiet glances a mixture of relief, awe, and shared understanding. As though the bell's lesson had touched every heart, Reverend Whitaker lit candles in the church, murmuring prayers for wisdom and restraint, knowing that faith alone could guide, but only when paired with humility, for some lessons demand reflection as much as action. Mary tended the garden once more, her hands steady, flowers blooming under morning sun, the village carrying on, yet the memory of the bell lingered, an invisible rhythm that reminded all of unseen consequences. Samuel avoided the tower, yet each midnight he felt the echo in dreams, a voice of warning soft yet insistent, teaching him patience, respect, and the humility that curiosity alone cannot guarantee. Villagers spoke less of the bell openly, yet their actions shifted subtly, doors secured, livestock tended with care, words measured, As if the presence of the unseen had instilled a lasting mindfulness, Reverend Whitaker shared the story in hushed tones with the young at the riverbank, cautioning that knowledge without prudence can awaken forces one cannot command, and the children listened with wide, serious eyes. Mary would sometimes glance at the tower, sunlight casting shadows along the stones, and she knew the bell had given them all a gift, a quiet understanding that some mysteries exist to test character, not to entertain curiosity. Samuel finally approached the tower at sunrise, laying a hand on the worn stone. A silent apology whispered into the cold air, as if reconciliation could ease the memory of pride and temptation he had awakened. And in that valley, people learned that some mistakes don't echo loudly, they whisper for generations.